My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sesangran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Nyanis. We've been covering the last week and the week before I left to the UK on chapter 18 of Mahan's teachings of birth, rebirths, reincarnation, and so on. And this is part 3 of our discussion. And I want to take a step back and reflect back what we have covered so far. And in the last 2 satsangs, we looked at our identity from the perspective of both the gross body and also the subtle body. And the first satsang, we covered how the gross body we inherit from nature itself. Our body is made out of all the elements of nature. And we see that the body, from conception right up to, when our parents give birth to us, and there's continuous evolution of the material body, and all the materials are assembled from the material universe. And, we go through a phase, and ultimately the body ages. There's a finite lifetime for every body. Every particle, everything in this universe goes through this evolution. From the galaxies to the stars to cells to even our own human bodies. And we showed that this change is, we have birth, sustenance, and then dissolution. In all this change, there is a substratum that remains constant. All the elements are assembled and then disassembled, sustained for a while, disassembled, but the form may change, but the substance still remains. What was a body, human body today, was assembled from, the plants and, the insects and the animals. And eventually, even while we are sustaining in this body, many things are living on us. A lot of bacteria and viruses, and, they start sustain on us too. There are good bacteria and there are bad bacteria, right? So they actually sustain from us. And finally, when we dissolve, the body dissolves, it goes back to the elements, basic elements that others will start use to reconstruct. So when we deeply introspect, at the surface level, there are changes happening. But within, what supports that is actually a substratum that is unchanging. So what do we mean by birth, sustenance, and death? It's merely a kind of a transformation that is taking place, but in the essence, the elements are still the same. So, this question of what is birth and death, comes back to, what do we mean by birth? Sometimes we say, well, there's a beginning, and then death means everything ends. Is that really true? And at the superficial level, at the surface level, yes. But, at the more granular, deeper level, we see it's the same. Very similar to waves in the ocean, right? We see a wave comes, then it hits the shore, and then, it dissolves. But you see that the forms of the waves continuously changes, but the ocean still remains the same. So we saw that even in that matter body case. And then we we went down a little bit more deeper in satsang 2 on the spirit or the soul itself. And I showed you examples of how that substratum always remains the same. As you see in this picture, the background is black, formless, dimensionless. Although we see form, the form is in the form of that substratum, that irul or the darkness, or what we call the formless, that is, at the core, it is unchanging. So we looked at that very, very carefully. Now, what I want to do today is actually do some thought experiments. And oftentimes, whenever we take a spiritual path, we have to reflect back, and think about these concepts deeply, because at the surface level, we may see changes and we may see a particular perspective. But as we go deeper and deeper, and you'll see in most of the previous satsangs, I always talk about the introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, ICRM. And that as we go deeper and deeper, we see that the reality starts changing, right? And I want to today, make you think, in an introspective way through thought experiments. In medical sciences, in many sciences, we can do experiments to validate, test, and so on. But what laboratory can we do these testings, right? Of, the self and the body and the experiences. There is no laboratory that we can test except the laboratory of our mind, our intellect, and the self itself. So part of the thought experiment is that we're going to look at using our mind as the laboratory of analysis. So for us to think a little bit more deeper, that's what ICRM is. So I want to take you through this whole new model of reincarnation, birth, death, rebirth, all those things. And let's see in a much more deeper way, asking a few questions with some examples and asking a few questions, and then reflecting on those questions, and then reflecting on us. What's really interesting is that you'll see in a lot of the writings of the great saints and sages in Upanishads, and including Mahan, and including in many of my writings on Mahan's teachings, you will see that when we introspect, we are actually doing thought experiment on three important things. Number one is that the workings of our material universe. How does our universe operate? What are the laws that guide it? Why are the laws there? What happens if the laws change? So, and we see that, we have part of our spiritual journey is to understand our material universe really well. We are lucky that, we have a lot of good thinkers that have thought about this, have come up with various principles, scientific discoveries that have give us good understanding of what's happening in the universe, what's happening, in our bodies and in our biology and so on. So this is one thing. So understanding our universe, material universe. The second aspect is actually to understand this concept of God. Here, the concept of God is to understand this creator. Who created this universe? Why is this creation here? What is this creator? Are we from the creator? Can we then experience the DNA of, if the creator has created us, then a part of the creator's DNA must be in us. Can we discover that? And if we discover that DNA, what would it look like? What would the characteristics be? So this is the second aspect of that exploration. The first aspect is our material world. The second aspect is the creation or the creator of this material universe. Sometimes we call it God, sometimes we call it many, many names. The third aspect is that the relationship between me or the self, the material universe, and this creator, right? So where do I emerge from? What gives me existence? So it's about the analysis of the self, right? So, and what is this self-discovery, and this self-actualization or self-realization. So there's three important aspects is in all the scriptures about the material universe, about creation and everything that comes with creation. It's about the creator. And the third aspect is about the observer of that creation, the experiencer of that creation. And the experience is asking this question, where did this all emerge? The self, exploration. So these three components are very important for us to then look at nature very carefully. So the principles of nature must capture or embed the qualities of the creator, right? And if we understand the universe really well, then elements of that creator could also be understood. And when we understand the elements of the creator, then when we self-reflect, we see, the principles that guide this material universe, which our body is made out of, the mind experiences this, and we understand this creator, so that element of the creator must also be within us. And this is the journey of self-discovery. So there's a convergence that takes place in the mind, as it explores in this way, these three things, the convergence of the three things, the material universe, God, and the self, gets closer and closer, and there comes a point that they become one. But to do that, one needs to really be, apply that introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation upon this constantly. And from there, we devise thought experiments to test, to validate our hypothesis. Is this convergence there? Like any other scientist, this is the proposition that you put. You look at the evidence, you make inference of the evidence and see whether you can validate the hypothesis or not, whether the convergence is taking place. So this is how great Mahans, great saints, and sages do this. And what's really interesting is that some of the top scientists and discoverers were also theologians and spiritualists. They asked similar questions, and you'll see that, over the discourse, you'll see that great people like Newton and Einstein and, various other scholars who had this element about the creator and the creation and where do I belong in all this. So I want to start off with a few examples of thought experiment that I myself started reflecting back and had a lot of questions in my journey. And these questions were queries, a lot of doubts, but using the ICRM approach, I started getting better understanding of the universe, better understanding of the creator and the creations, and ultimately better understanding of who I was. So I want to start off with some thought experiment, just, putting this picture up. And this picture gives you a glass of water and the ocean, right? And the ocean has water, the basic elements of life. And the glass contains that ocean. What's really interesting is that the ocean has waves, it's formless, dimensionless, it's expansive. This is one characteristic of the ocean. But the water that is in the ocean has now a subset of the water is in the glass. So while the water's basic quality of H2O is still the same, but you see that the water in the glass looks very different from the water in the ocean. Basic building blocks are still the same. But in the glass, something very interesting you see. The water takes on the form of the glass. This is how flexible the water is. This is how amiable the water is. And the beautiful part is that if I put a square glass, it'll take a square. If I put a cylindrical glass, it'll take a cylindrical. I put any shape of the glass, the water is so flexible and agile. So what was formless can take form. So I want to push this analysis. So this is a very interesting, phenomena that we see in nature. And as I told you earlier, that if we understand nature and the forces of nature, then elements of the creator is embedded there. And if you understand that, then the elements of the creator and the universe and us, we see very, very similar things. So this is the thought experiments that we need to do. So I'm going to make some assumptions. So assume that the water is like the soul or the spirit, is formless, dimensionless, and so on, colorless. If you look at the water itself, the water is colorless. Unless you put some coffee powder, it becomes coffee. The water becomes coffee. If you put Milo, it's now a Milo drink. Or if you put a little bit of the Coca-Cola essence, it becomes Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. But in the basic building blocks, water is water, H2O, right? So it's flexible, it's amiable, dimensionless, formless, somewhat like our silent soul that is observing everything. The glass is like our body. It's got form, it's got structure, and if you see a glass maker, how he makes the glass, and you see that they have a small bowl and they start blowing and the glass expands. Somewhat like, a glass maker our divine force that is blowing in us, and our body has a natural growth until a terminal growth period, and then it starts declining. So assumption is that assume like the glass is the body, right? So the body, and what is really interesting is that the experiencer or the soul now takes the form and the shape of the body. What I mean is that the mind now, which is in its original form, is formless, dimensionless, infinite. When it gets into the glass or into the body, it has got a fixed dimension, fixed personality, right? So if it takes on a square body, if it's in a square glass, it becomes square. If it's a cylindrical glass, it becomes cylindrical. Somewhat like, the relationship between our soul and our body. So here are a few questions, as I put this simple analogy, I had a few questions. So what is the shape of the water before in the glass? Well, it was formless and dimensionless and so on. So we know this, right? As you can see in the ocean, I can take an empty glass. Before that, it is formless, dimensionless, and so on. So we know that. In that same parallel, we ask this question that before I took on this body, what was my experience, right? And we see that our experience is formless. We don't know the form. We don't have the experience of a body. Hence, all the apparatus of what we know as a world is not there. There's an absence. Body has time. This soul has timeless, like the water can continuously flow, takes waves, go back to its original state. So again, we see that, the absence of that Swamiji calls no thingness. We see that there was a period that we were absent, the body was absent, and we are fully in the state of silence. We know that. But the moment, I always wondered, when did I first have an experience of the body or develop my own personality? I think I can go back to my first memory of maybe 3 years old, right? But prior to that, I still existed, but, the memory was not there. So we know that, before that body or the glass was there, the form of that experiencer, the soul, is formless, dimensionless, timeless. And we see this through this analogy, just showing you that if you see the ocean, that is what the water was before it got into the glass. So it was formless, dimensionless. So we're doing a thought experiment of showing the analogy between the water in the glass and the water in the ocean. You'll see the parallels, right? So the water in the glass, prior to being in the glass, was formless, dimensionless, didn't know what the shape of a glass was until it got into the glass. The moment it got into the glass, it realizes that, hey, the waves are not there. The waves of continuous flow is not there, right? And what is really interesting is that it takes on the shape. So if the water had a memory called mind, it'll think that it is actually cylindrical, right? As how, our mind, which is formless, when it takes on this form, say, I am Mahendhiran. I am this height, this weight, this, all material. So when I ask, who are you? You'll give your name, which people have given the identity to the body. Can you describe about yourself? You'll describe, well, I have glasses, I'm this feet, my color of my skin is this, I have a beard. So we are describing the body, right? So the mind is describing the body. But in actual fact, the mind was formless and dimensionless and infinite, right? So if you ask most enlightened people, they are able to differentiate between, the body, the small I identity. When I'm in the body, this is what the material identity is, but actually I am the big I. So this thought experiment, so this simple example tells us the kind of relationship between water and glass as the relationship between the soul and the body. So we are learning from nature itself. I say that the material universe has, all the principles of the creator. And that same principle of that formless, dimensionless, and formed from the glass also reflects back to us. So let's push on further questions. What is the true shape of the water? Right? It depends on very much on where you are standing. If I was in the ocean, if I had an ocean mindset, I would say my mind is like an ocean. It's expansive. It carries all the waves, waves after waves, but yet the basic building block is still the same. I don't change. I am the H2O that enables all the waves, but I am not the wave. I enable the wave. That is what if I was the ocean. I support everything. I sustain everything, right? I cleanse everything, right? And that's what the ocean mindset would be. But if I was in the glass, I would say, no, I am actually this water in this glass with this shape and this, if there is, coffee or something, you'll say, I am also this color. I taste this way and so on. But the actual water, H2O, is formless in the glass too. It's taking a form, and a kind of an artificial form, because the structure of this material universe, forces this form that when you contain it, the water is so flexible can also take on that form, right? And what is really interesting is that if I put more material things in there, the color changes, the taste changes. And if I was the water in the glass, I'll say, actually, you know what? I'm not H2O. I am coffee, or I'm Milo, or I'm Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, right? That's the identity, we don't say that, when we buy Coca-Cola or Milo, we say we are water, essenced with Milo or coffee. We say we are coffee, or we're Milo, or we are Coca-Cola. This is what happens to the human mind, that the human mind that is so caught up with this material world is enraptured by the material identity. So are they wrong? Not really. If the mind is in the ocean and it's wedded and welded to the characteristics of the ocean, then it takes an oceanless, ocean mindset. In that same way, the same water, if it's wedded and welded to the glass, and whatever goes into the glass, then the mind takes on that identity. But Mahans and other great saints, this is the part that the illumined ones say, yes, I am coffee, yes, I am this and this, but the essence of me is H2O. Without that colorless, tasteless water, H2O, you would not be able to taste coffee very well. Without the colorless and tasteless water, you would not be able to taste that Milo really well. Can you imagine if the water had taste? Would you be able to taste the Milo and coffee? The answer is no, right? You have to be, so what you see in terms of the material experiences can only be experienced on a substratum that is formless, dimensionless, and so on. So this is what we see, the parallels between the water glass and the human body and that consciousness. What about the color? You see, the essence of the water is colorless, right? But if you see very clearly that colorless enables us to, by drop an essence of red color syrup, it becomes red, right? Or green color, it becomes green, right? So the water enables us to, experience life in its fullest form, right? And that's the beauty that experiences gives us, that whole water experience that is. So the beauty of life can only be appreciated and experienced if one has that colorless, formless, dimensionless. So we see this, in the essence, at the ocean level, the water is colorless, but it enables all the colors. Sometimes people ask this question, how come the ocean has got blue color? and I'll come back to that question later. Why is the ocean blue? Is the ocean blue or is the ocean colorless? And I think most of you all will know why the ocean is blue color, and you know, there is a reflection that takes place. The whole idea of that blueness of the ocean comes from that reflection of the ozone layer, and you have the ultraviolet light from the sun that is coming in, and you see that it traps the blue rays, and that's reflecting onto the oceans. But the ocean itself is colorless, very similar to putting in Milo or coffee. We see that the ozone, the light radiation that hits through, you see that the radiation enables that the light that comes through and gives the blue appearance that reflects back onto the ocean. That it seems that the ocean is blue, but actually, in essence, the ocean is colorless. And finally, the last question is the most important question, right? So I have this form, water with a form, maybe there is color if I put in some coffee powder, and so on. And it gives an identity to that water. The identity comes from that material existence. But if I threw the water back to the ocean and captured back that water, what is the probability that the water that I have now, and after I throw away and pick it up back, what is the probability that I will get all the molecules of the water before throwing and after throwing being the same? So this is the question that, so think of the water as the soul, right? So formless, it's plugged into this body, it takes form, and then the body dissolves. And think of the water going back to its ocean. What is the probability that everything, all molecules that was present in this body is also present in the next body? And this is the part that is very subtle between the reincarnation, that what is reincarnated? We know that the body, in its basic building block is the same. The elements change. But what about that consciousness, right? The ocean mindset and the material identity. When the material identity is dissolved in the ocean, what identity does it have? And when it's plugged back into another glass, would that identity in the first glass be in the identity of the second glass? If it is, if you can get the full experience, then people say, well, that's actually reincarnation in the sense that, I was in the previous glass, that glass was this form, and now I'm in this glass, is a different form, but the experience is still the same. So this thought experiment of what reincarnation really means, most people think, well, previous life I was this life I'm this, and that, there is a reincarnation of the soul. This is a very subtle issue that I will explore in this and the next few satsangs. There is a very subtle difference, but yet there are, the concepts are very different according to different schools of thought. But I wanted to test it out. What if I threw back the water and tried to capture it back? Would I be able to capture everything that was there in the previous? The answer is probably what we call non-zero, very, very remote, almost impossible to capture back all the molecules, right? So what does reincarnation then means? So what do we mean by, taking on a different body and experiencing fully that experience of the previous bodies? Very subtle. So just to summarize, because this is where the essence is, and I want to leave with some questions for you to think about and explore, because that's part of the journey of introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. So we see that the soul is formless, but seem to take the form of a material being, right? So this is the distinction between big I and the small I, right? So we have this kind of we covered this illusion that we are this material, and we covered this issue of, the veiling nature of this material universe. It blocks us from seeing who we are. Avarna, this is the term that is used. But when we go deep down, when we slowly, remove this illusionary, as we go deeper and deeper, we see that, yes, there is form. Yes, there is color. Yes, there is, but all this is happening in a formless substratum. This is part of the material world of change that enables us to see, things differently, the infinite possibilities, right? So in essence, we see that in the formless, dimensionless, colorless, color can be appreciated. In that colorless, color can be experienced fully. When the tongue is tasteless, a small grain of salt will give you a full experience of the salt. But if your tongue is already full of salt, the small pebble will be lost, a small grain of salt will be lost, right? So to experience this material world, in its fullest form, one needs to experience this silent, dimensionless, formless, colorless. And this is the essence of life. Life can only be fully appreciated if we appreciate that silent substratum in us. Now, this is the part I'm going to go a little bit more deeper, which, part of this journey that I want you to take is that this has infinite potential and possibilities. And this is the beauty of this ocean. It can take many, many waves. In its essence, of colorless dimensions, it can take many forms, many dimensions, many colors, but yet it is colorless, right? So our experience of this life can only take place if the presence of that silent substratum, what we call soul or God force. So therein lies this answer of this universe that is continuously changing, transforming, full of colors, new galaxies forming, new, sentient beings emerging, different diversity. All of that is happening on a substratum that is infinite and, infinite potential and possibilities. And that's probably what we call the Creator is. That's what, if you see the definition of God is, right? Enabler of everything, but not touched by anything, right? So there is this link between, if you see the water enables many things, but water itself is formless, dimensionless. So there is a subtle, relationship between that form and the formless, between the material universe and that infinite, formless creator, whatever we call that name is, right? And what's really interesting now is that we make that link between the form and the formless, or the creation and the creator. Then we reflect back to us. Hey, we have that formed body, but the formed body also is riding on a formless substratum, because we know that there are moments in our lives that we experience that form. We do not experience the body in our deep sleep, in our deep meditation, and so on. So there is a substratum in us that is dimensionless, formless. We completely lose our identity, right? So when we look at the glass and the ocean, and when we look at reflected and the subtle link between that formless and the form, the small I and the big I, when we reflect it back through this introspection, contemplation, reflection, hey, we are like the glass that has formed, but within that we have a formless substratum that enables us to power us, but carry that material software or mindset to be able to function in this material world. But yet, sometimes we forget that we think that we are the glass, right? But Mahan's remind us, no, you are actually the user of the glass or the experience of the glass. You are something else, right? And that is why in this glass, you are this shape. In next glass, you are a different shape. So you are amiable and agile. And that is why, this whole part of you are actually smart. You are more creative. Smart means seamlessly integrated, and there is this whole concept of I'm covering now on smart seamless integration, moral obligation to understand who we are between the glass and that self, the agility, resilience, and so on. So from this example, we see the link between the formulas, and ourselves. Now the question, remember I asked you the question, if I threw the water back to the sea or the ocean, what is the probability of getting all the same water molecules back? And I said to you that it is probably close to zero or impossible to get it, right? But I want you to think about that. I just was being a little bit, controversial here, or, pushing you to think about it. Yes, if I see the molecules in such a way that they are separate molecules, then yes, the probability of getting the molecules that were there in the previous class and this class would be pretty close to zero. So here again, the separation comes if I look at the molecules separately. But what if I told you that the H2O molecules, as I go deeper, are interconnected, right? There's a substratum below that molecules, hydrogen and oxygen, which has space and time and further subtle energy, but they're all interconnected. That means the ocean itself is one interconnected substratum. So if I pick up an element, a subset of it, the same DNA is the same in the ocean. So if I see it from a molecule perspective, yes, there may be separate. If I go deeper than the molecules, it is a substratum that is supporting all the molecules at a different level, at a more subtle level. So you see that the seamless, differences or the seamless lack of connectivity is actually supported by a substratum which is much more connected. So if you see very carefully, then at the much more lower level, every molecule is connected. Every molecule resonates at the same frequency, and we see that as we go deeper and deeper, the connection is much more seamlessly integrated. So this brings us back to an important concept. So what do we mean by reincarnation? If even the change is, on the surface has changed, even the molecules on the surface looks different, but actually deeper down, there is something that brings everything together. So if we bring that concept to the idea, then to our understanding, then the question is, what do we mean by birth and death? What do we mean by reincarnation? What is this experience of reincarnation means? Reincarnation means that, you experience the previous birth and next and so on. But what if those are all transitioning on a substratum which is unchanging? What do we mean by reincarnation then? So I want you to think about this, because this is a concept that we will take through more deeper in the next few satsangs. And I think I've given you some hints, that while the molecules themselves look very different, they're all interconnected. So at the most subtle level. And you see that, reincarnation means something very different. So I wanted to think about it, and, for you to write down these 5 questions, look at this example and reflect back, because this example will come back again in a much more deeper way, because I'm going to go through now, if there are light that is percolating through the water, there are some notions of refractions and so on. What does that mean in the context of life itself? With that, Sandosham,